Imagine a woman who only ate Hershey chocolate candy bars to survive while doing undercover detective work during the civil rights era. She even dressed as a cotton picker when she would go under disguise. A black woman during Jim Crow, who drove over 40,000 miles alone down dark roads in the Deep South to investigate and solve crimes. She once proclaimed that this was a man's world, and yet, people barely remember her name. Her name was Ruby Hurley. This is the story of one of the most prolific civil rights activists that would go on to recruit 90,000 people. And she would go on a crusade to fight Jim Crow crimes, even when no one else would, all while only eating Hershey chocolate candy bars. She was born in the early 1900s to Alice and Edward Ruffin. By the 1920s, she wasn't in contact with her parents anymore and was living with teachers. Ruby may have been orphaned at a very young age. She would go on to marry, but it would end in divorce in the 1940s. It's not clear whether or not her activism was the cause of why the marriage ended. This was very controversial at that time. You see, women often needed husbands just to open bank accounts. She would go on to work with the NAACP as early as 1939, at a time when being associated with that organization alone could put a target on your back. What would make a city girl from Washington, D.C., so passionate about helping other black people down south? She could have stayed up north and continued to thrive with a high level of safety. You see, this was not just symbolic activism. This was real, dangerous, day-to-day work in some of the most hostile environments in America. Her task was to travel across the South investigating crimes against black Americans, cases local officials ignored, covered up, or refused to touch. Assaults, disappearances, violent attacks that never made headlines the way they should have. This was very groundbreaking because this was the 1940s during a very segregated and dangerous time for black people. She was also a divorced woman alone. Anything could have happened to her. There had already been reports of women who had been violated, like Reese Taylor in the 1940s, by 6 white men with no recourse. The roads that this woman drove on were often long, quiet, and dangerous in a way people didn't always say out loud. Picture somewhere down south. A black family whispers about a crime that just happened down the road. Someone was attacked, a person went missing, someone didn't make it home. And everybody knows nothing is going to be done about it. Now imagine this woman getting in her car and driving straight into that silence, with no police protection, no cameras or backup, just a mission. Ruby Hurley wasn't just part of the movement, she was on the ground, doing the work that made the movement possible. In 1955, Hurley joined with civil rights activists alongside people like Amzie Moore and Medgar Evers, who were field secretaries at the NAACP's Mississippi office. They were in charge of investigating the murders of Minister George W. Lee and 14-year-old Emmett Till. In order to interview witnesses for Till's case, Hurley wore cotton picker's clothes. It was one of her biggest cases that she worked on. She later joined in on a tour to bring nationwide attention to the tragedy. There were moments when Ruby Hurley had to blend in just to stay alive, move carefully, watch who was watching her, stay one step ahead of suspicion. In certain areas, being identified as a civil rights worker could be deadly, so she adapted. She learned how to move through towns without drawing attention, how to gather information quietly, how to survive in places where people didn't want her asking questions. Because asking questions meant exposing the truth. And exposing the truth made people uncomfortable. Money was limited. Resources were stretched thin. And the work didn't pause just because she was tired, hungry, or running on empty. So she kept going. Hurley traveled more than 40,000 miles by bus and car, often alone, which was unheard of at that time. Hurley's efforts were met with open hostility, and she faced constant danger. Her house was attacked, and she received obscene and threatening telephone calls. Following a riot at the University of Alabama campus, black taxi drivers came together and offered her protection, circling her home. During her travels, sticking to her principles of never eating in segregated restaurants led to its own hardships and plight.
I refuse to eat at those restaurants.
She once said, "I was never going to eat in segregated places. So, if I ran out of Hershey bars, I didn't eat, oft times 24 hours, I didn't have anything to eat." Not because she wanted to, but because it was quick, cheap, and enough to keep her moving from one place to the next. She even had to flee Alabama and was banned from operating the NAACP there in that state. That is how dangerous it was for her. From one case to the next, from one story to another that someone was trying to bury. While others turned away, Ruby Hurley kept showing up, and she wasn't just investigating, she was organizing. Ruby Hurley helped grow the NAACP in the South to tens of thousands of members, reaching nearly 90,000 people at a time when joining that organization could cost someone their job, their safety, even their life. She also helped Black students gain access to colleges that once denied them based off of their race. She was affectionately called Mother Hurley by fellow NAACP employees. Think about that. 90,000 people. This was before social media. There was no ads or viral moments at that time. It was all grassroots. This growth was built through real conversations and real risk. She was building something in the middle of a system designed to shut it down. The stress of that kind of work doesn't just disappear. It builds day after day. Case after case. Story after story. Ruby Hurley was eventually diagnosed with a stress-related condition, what many today would recognize as the toll of sustained psychological pressure, all due to having to face constant danger, constant movement, constant exposure to trauma, and still she kept going, because the work had to be done. And here's the part that should stop people in their tracks. Despite everything she did, despite the risks, the travel, the investigations, the organizing, the lives she impacted, her name isn't widely known. You see, we hear about certain moments, the marches and popular speeches that are played on heavy rotation. But some of the people who made those moments possible, the ones driving down dark roads, knocking on doors, documenting crimes no one else would touch like Hurley, who would only eat chocolate candy to survive. Too often, people like her are left out of the story. Ruby Hurley wasn't just a supporter of civil rights. She was one of the people holding the entire operation together behind the scenes. She went where others wouldn't go. She asked questions others were afraid to ask. In a Jet magazine interview from the 1950s, she was cited as a radical, and by some of her peers, a militant woman. She was progressive and certainly ahead of her time. But Ruby kept moving when stopping would have been easier. Ms. Hurley once said, "When you're in the middle of these situations, there's no room for fear," she said. "If you have fear in your heart or mind, you can't do a good job." And she was right. She was a strong woman who sacrificed her own health to fight against inequality and injustices. And sometimes, she did it with nothing but chocolate candy in her pocket. Ruby Hurley passed away just 2 years later after a long career spanning almost 40 years for the NAACP. The Queen of Civil Rights will never be forgotten. Scope News tells the truth. Here are the facts. Ruby Hurley served as a key NAACP organizer and regional director in the mid-20th century, helping expand membership across the South to tens of thousands. Historical accounts document her fieldwork investigating racial violence and civil rights abuses, often under dangerous conditions. Records and oral histories also describe the intense physical and psychological toll this work took on activists like Hurley, including stress-related health issues. Her contributions, while significant, remain less publicly recognized compared to more widely known figures of the era. Legal disclaimer. This content is presented for educational, informational, and historical purposes. While every effort has been made to accurately represent documented events, some narrative elements are written in a descriptive storytelling format to provide context and engagement. Certain details may be condensed or interpreted based on available historical records. Viewer discretion is advised, as the subject matter includes references to racial violence, systemic injustice, and historical trauma.